Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome a very distinguished guest, William Bill Lightfoot, a 36-year career police officer and investigator specializing in elder abuse and neglect. Welcome, Bill. We're going to call you Bill if that's okay.
That's great. That's fine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We're going to be talking about something that's very near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is elder abuse. Let's start off, Bill, with describing, how would you describe or define elder abuse?
Elder abuse is the mistreatment or of anyone over the age of 60. And to be honest with you, it's a very huge topic. It has a lot of parts and pieces that they can go on and on and on. But it is mainly, in most states, it is the abuse or the mistreatment of a person 60 and older. 60 and older,
okay. What, with your, very long esteemed career with the police department as an investigator, did you see a disproportionate number of cases of elder abuse? Because I feel like elder abuse is something we hear about. Child abuse, we hear about spousal abuse and domestic violence, but it doesn't seem like elder abuse really gets as much attention as these other forms of abuse. Is that a fair statement, or is that too generalized?
It's very fair. It's for those people who deal with elder abuse on a daily basis, what we think we're seeing is maybe 1 out of every 10 cases. It is misunderstood. It is not talked about, not enough anyway. It is a subject that people don't like to talk about, or they don't know that the issue is that huge or that important. Unfortunately, it is just becoming to the point now where people are starting to notice that something is off center. For years, and I was an elder abuse investigator before I retired, and it's a very large, confusing topic sometimes, but it's not nearly talked about enough. The federal government is finally stepping in and taking a real close look at some of the issues, not all of them, but some of them. The United States Attorney's Office in several places have issued papers on what the federal government is doing. Some states still aren't doing as much as they should, because it's just not an issue that let's face it, doesn't get people elected to office.
Right.
It's not an issue that people deem that important, mainly because they don't know the size of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so abuse is a very broad term as well.
Yeah.
What are the different forms of elder abuse?
Some of the physical abuse, which is just what it says it is.
Mhm.
Physical abuse can include, and I'm going by my notes here because
Yeah.
if I don't, we'll be here all day long. But physical abuse is just what it sounds like. It's the physical harming of a person, punching, kicking, hitting, uh, and I've had some cases where there were even burns. Um, People have taken cigarettes and burned, and that's the most visible form of abuse because you can see it.
Right.
You know when a person's been hurt, and you can see the injuries. Some of the other forms, though, we're looking at sexual abuse. And that's a topic that really people don't like to talk about sexual abuse, period, whether it's children or anyone else. But when it comes to seniors, they don't want to believe or they don't want to hear that seniors are being sexually abused. And financial abuse is another one. And we can talk about financial abuse in a little bit, but that's a huge, if you hear people talk about elder abuse and they're willing to talk about it, they're usually talking about financial abuse. And financial abuse can include things like I've had seniors lose millions and millions of dollars, their whole life savings, and forged checks, the taking of cash, the taking of property and selling it for their own benefit. And where I find some people get confused that they're talking about elder financial abuse versus frauds and scams. That's two separate issues.
Right.
Elder abuse usually refers to someone that's close to that senior, a caregiver, a relative, someone they know. Frauds and scams, on the other hand, a fraud and scam can happen to anyone. But there are fraudsters out there that target seniors for a particular reason. Seniors over the age of 60 tend to be more trusting, and they're more susceptible to scams. When you look at the issue, especially for investigators or for prosecutors, elder financial abuse by a known individual is a whole different type of investigation or prosecution than someone that's not known. And scammers and fraudsters usually are people who operate in many areas and you don't know who they are all the time. There are frauds and scams that come out of other countries.
Right.
Some come out of, maybe I shouldn't mention the countries, but they come to this country by people who do that for a living. That's a whole different type of issue. There is also in financial abuse, there's a term called undue influence. And undue influence is that process used by a person who is an abuser to force or intimidate um, a senior into doing something that is against their best interest. Uh, you don't hear that term very often, and I'll be the first to admit that if you think that undue influence is being used, um, and it includes threats, intimidation, coercion, and it even includes something like pet abuse.
Mm.
People were threatened to harm a loved pet to get this person to do something that is against their best interest. I've seen a report on undue influence, and it was like 90 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, it was done by a psychologist somewhere in California. But to break it, to really get to the real meaning of undue influence, it is forcing a person over 60 to do something against their best interests.
Bill, if I could just jump in, do you think that situations of elder abuse, like undue influence and these different types, do you think they go underreported for fear of reprisal? I can't call and report my granddaughter or my son.
Yeah.
It's my family, so they just kind of live with it. Is that common?
They go underreported, and as I said in the start, we're looking at maybe 1 out of every 6 to 10 cases of elder abuse out there.
Wow.
They go unreported for a lot of reasons. Number one is fear.
Mm-hmm.
And when a senior has been, for an example, when a senior has been in their home for, I don't know, 50 years, you hear abusers saying, if you don't do what I say, I'll sell the house and you have to go live somewhere else. That kind of fear. Yeah. Intimidation, coercion, threats against the person. If you don't do this, I will do whatever. All of that plays into whether it's reported or not. And we know, and when I say we, people who are doing this for a living, we know that we're not seeing maybe a third of what's out there.
So what, for viewers and listeners who may have an elder loved one in their family or a neighbor or someone they're aware of, and they might have some suspicions that they might be being abused, neglected, or abandoned even, what are some of the risk factors for that abuse?
From the abuser side?
Yeah, what are risk factors for being abused?
Well, there's 2 forms of risk factors. One is for the person being abused. And some of those risk factors include, of course, their age, whether they have a mental disability, for instance, if they have Alzheimer's, or some mental factor that keeps them from responding. Some of the other risk factors are poor health for the person being abused, because they know that they need that caregiver, and they're afraid that caregiver may just not take care of them. Right. Period. Give them their meds, give them their meals, things that they need for quality of life. Social isolation is another huge factor. Many abusers will keep an abused person isolated, so they don't. If you're 70 years old and you don't drive, and you have a physical disability, it's very hard for you to report something.
Right.
How would you even go about reporting? And one of the things we try to get to seniors is to keep them social, and that sometimes will break the abuse, or it'll bring it forward. And you'll see depression, confusion, all of that plays into whether they report it or not. As far as the abuser, it is a matter of control. And people who do domestic violence all the time or talk about domestic violence is power and control. And that's a very common term. As long as they can control that senior, then they can do pretty much whatever they want and know that they're doing it in safety. They're not going to be found out because the senior has no one to report to. Mm-hmm. Or they have no way of reporting, or they can't. An 80-year-old senior that's being abused, it's very hard for them. Who are they going to report to?
And then they have the fear of reprisal.
Yeah. So I tell professionals, and there is a training for professionals in elder abuse. It lasts about 3 or 4 hours. One of the things I tell them is to make sure that you visit those seniors. Go to their home, see how much food's in their refrigerator. Check their medications. I've had abusers who will take their medications and sell it on the streets. Check to see what their living conditions are. I've had seniors who were bed confined that could not get out of bed for whatever they need. And they were left in there in dire conditions and just left alone. Another form of abuse is abandonment. And I've found seniors being left in bus stations, shopping malls, hospital waiting rooms, and they take them there and just leave them. And, I had an officer, when I was still a police officer, had an officer, it was like 12 o'clock at night. It was cold. It was in the winter. He came on the radio and he said, we have a shopping area here in Richmond. It's where it's a farmer's market, but it's closed at night. He had an 80 plus senior sitting on a bench, and it was freezing cold because it was snowing. And someone had just dropped her off on the corner, set her on a bench and said, we'll be right back. They just left her there. Mm-hmm. You find seniors abandoned in parks. And, abandonment doesn't mean that they have to be away from, doesn't mean they have to be left somewhere. They can be abandoned in their own home.
Right.
Simply by neglect. In other words, you just don't acknowledge that they even exist.
I want to ask you a professional question, Bill, because we've been talking for a little while now, and I'm just having these visual images, and just the thoughts are just very difficult, to hear and to even imagine happening to a senior or to anybody of any age. Your illustrious 36 plus career, how as a police officer, an investigator that's dealing with these issues, how does that how do you manage and separate that from, seeing some of these horrors and travesties to these poor seniors, and then still being able to go back the next day and, do it all over again? How does that work for someone like yourself?
It's a hard question to answer. Um, you have to, within yourself, be willing to put out to do the job and to do it professionally. And you need to have some self-help available for you. A lot of police departments now have contracted services of psychiatrists, psychologists, and being a police officer is has changed over the years with it has changed with society. Mm-hmm. It used to be if a police officer went to see someone for self-help, they were ridiculed. Now it's changing. Please understand that not only does it affect their job, it affects their families, it affects their emotions. And a lot of police departments are now contracted with mental health professionals. But you need self-help.
Sure.
You need self-caring.
And I think even doctors, doctors and lawyers, I mean, they still, their professions I'd put their professions and police right up there at the very top of the most noblest. For me, it's, pastors, police officers, firefighters, doctors. And, I think there's similarities in the sense that communities, societies, for different reasons, look to those professions for help in some of their greatest times of need. And they're trying to help. And, you are all, human, and, you take that home with you. And especially for yourself, Bill, this tremendous work you're trying to do to help seniors who have been, victims of neglect, abuse, abandonment. It's always kind of in a way fascinated me in the sense, taking that home and being able to turn that part of your life off, I just think it sometimes have, might be difficult. Like, I'm sure you have a case where it might stand out above all the others that you encountered that really, left an impact on you. And I just think that sometimes you can maybe even come to like a compassion fatigue or an emotional fatigue from having to see some of the worst of our society.
I used to, when I first became a police officer, I had a commanding officer, and his theory was, when you go home, you leave your work here. You just go home and forget it. And that was one of the biggest fallacies, because you don't leave it. You take it with you. And it is impossible for you to go home at 5 o'clock in the evening or at 9 o'clock in the morning, whenever you get home, and leave everything you've done at work. And people now, especially police officers, firefighters, ER doctors, ER nurses, and I've worked with a lot of ER nurses. They now understand that you can't leave it at work, that you need self-help.
Yeah.
And the stigma of going to seek help is going away slowly, but it's going away. And people are not embarrassed to now go see a psychologist, go see a psychiatrist, and get the self-help they need. Because unless you get self-help, you cannot help anyone else.
Right. And
So
well, and I don't know if this is exactly fair, but I think a lot of that could still be said for family caregivers too, who are caring for
yeah,
a spouse, a child with special needs, disabilities, a grandparent, a parent, and they have to get that help too because I think there are some statistics that show family caregivers, they get to a point when they're caring for their loved one that it goes from caring for them to some neglect and sometimes some abuse because they have just reached the end of the road.
it does. And there are some places, and I can think of maybe two or three right offhand, where there are caregiver groups, and they meet once a week, and it is a place for them to go and just air everything out. And they find out, well, I'm not the only one, that there are other people out here. And they, those groups really, those self-help groups really work. I'd like to see more of them, especially for caregivers, because the frustration of caregiving, like you just said, can lead to incidents of abuse.
Yeah.
So the more help groups out there, the better it's going to be. It's hard to get people to come in to one because when they go to the self-help group, one of the complaints I had from a group out in Southwest Virginia was, if I take 2 hours and I go to this meeting, who's going to care for my mom?
Right.
So now they have to find someone else to come in and care for mom while they're gone, which adds a little bit of a side twinge to it. I can't leave to go to this meeting because I don't have anyone to take care of mom at 9 o'clock at night.
Right. Yeah.
So it has its own downside.
Yeah. Bill, I want to kind of close with just a couple more questions, and I want to say thank you so much for your time today, and for all the advocacy, and for your 36 years of protecting and serving our communities. It's very admirable, and we applaud you for that. And now you're doing Lightfoot Consulting Associates. Let's talk a little bit about that, because viewers or listeners may be interested in reaching out to your firm. You go around and you do education, and we're going to have the PowerPoint up here as well that you present on elder abuse. But what services do you offer through your consulting?
It depends on what it is.
Okay.
If it is an elder abuse, and the three areas that I touch on are elder abuse, domestic violence in the workplace, how it affects a person who's what happens in the workplace when they are victims of domestic violence, and human trafficking. If it is something that can be referred out to a social service agency, to the police, then I encourage them to make that report, because that report that they need to make is the start of them healing. It is also the start of having the abuser face the issues of abuse. So a lot of it is referral. As far as the training goes, I try to get to both citizen groups and professional groups. And a lot of times that's two separate things, especially in elder abuse. I'll do training for church groups, for civic groups. They don't get the same training that would be provided for a police department. Huh. Because the the police need to hear more. A citizens group does not need to hear of investigative procedures and prosecutors. Uh, they don't need all of that professional input. They just need to know that the abuse exists. So when I do the talks for a seniors group, it's a lot shorter than what I'll do for a for a professional group. Same thing with human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
There's a human trafficking presentation for civic groups because a lot of people really don't believe human trafficking exists. When I do it for professional groups, it's a lot longer. So what I do, if I need to go talk to the senior, I had an officer call one day, and he said he had a report of a senior being abused, but when he got there, the senior wouldn't talk to him. And I said, okay, I'll be there in a minute. So when I went over there, I said, why won't she talk to you? And he said, I don't know. So I said, well, let me go talk to her. So I went in and talked to this lady. And I said, why won't you tell the officer what happened? And she was in her 80s. And she looked at me and she said, who gave that young man permission to call me by my first name? He went in and he thought he was making a good connection, and he went in and called her by her first name. That just wasn't done in her generation, you know. But you asked me what I would do. I go and talk to seniors a lot.
Yeah.
I talk to domestic violence victims a lot and try to get them to places where they can get continued help. For a domestic violence victim, we have some domestic violence sexual assault programs here in Virginia, and I try to get them to the program that's closest to them.
It's remarkable. When did you retire, Bill, from the police department?
I retired first in 2013, and I went to the housing authority here for a while, for a year and a half, actually. And then they came back to me and said, look, we have a grant and we want to open a domestic violence unit. Will you come back? So I went back. And I stayed another 2 years until the grant, was over. And then I retired a second time. So
around 2015, 16?
yeah.
But
I've been doing this since then.
What is it about elder abuse and seniors that inspired you to continue your post-retirement career, doing what you're doing now?
I enjoyed doing the work as a police officer, but 36 years was enough.
Long time.
I just wanted to find another way to do what I really thought needed doing. So I just kind of switched things over to doing it on my own.
Well, and you're international now.
Yeah. But if you ever see a senior who has been abused, physically abused, sexually abused, it was something we didn't talk about either. It was emotional abuse. And that can be devastating to a senior, emotionally and psychologically. If you've ever had to deal with a senior who is going through issues, you understand that they need someone to make that pain go away.
Yeah. And
and
I
it is pain.
did you, because I'm just picturing, we'll use the 80-year-old woman, and she's been a victim of some type of form of abuse by a grandson, her son or daughter. And how do they, that's like an ultimate, break in that relationship. But does the senior typically return to that relationship after some given time? I just think that would be very difficult for them, especially at that age and point in their life.
It depends a whole lot on what type of abuse you're
Okay.
talking about. If that caregiver has committed a criminal offense,
Hmm.
then it's necessary to find other means
Yeah.
to help. And there are home care agencies. Most of them are very, very good at what they do. There are a few that have been cited for their own type of financial abuse or for other types of abuse, but that's not the norm.
Okay.
Uh, it becomes incumbent upon either social services or someone to try and find competent caregiving,
Hmm.
whether it is visiting or in home, especially if the original caregiver is going to jail or is being prosecuted. What I would like to see a lot more of, and we see it a lot in domestic violence, are protective orders. They are a standard form of response to domestic violence. I don't see protective orders being issued for the protection of seniors that much. And I'd like to see that done more.
Hmm. Yeah.
But to answer the question, um, they don't. It is necessary that the police or social services, number one, have the training to understand what to do with the senior who is 80 years old and has no caregiver,
Yeah. It's tough.
and to have to have the help they need. And one of the things we find that we need a lot more of is effective legislation.
Yes. Right.
Around the country, we need to get to our legislators and make a legislator understand what elder abuse really is
Right.
and to put effective legislation out there. Because without that, social services has nothing to fall back on.
Right. Yeah. They have to have some
Uh,
teeth.
they need that stable law to say, look, the law says I this is what the law tells me to do, and I can do this. Without effective legislation, you kind of just hit and missing, especially if you're in social services.
Right. Right.
They need that protection from legislation.
Just to wrap up here, Bill, I just want to kind of toot your horn for you. I had mentioned, you're also international. You're the member of the AGE UK, Action on Elder Abuse in the United Kingdom, via London. You serve as a consultant to the Alzheimer's and Related Disorders Society of India, Mumbai, India. Serves as a consultant to the Association of Senior Citizens of Hyderabad, India. And you're the member of the Elder Rights Coalition, Washington, D.C., the National Legislative Advocacy Group. This is all post-retirement.
Yeah, it is.
I think we need to just really, applaud the tremendous work you're doing on behalf of seniors all over the world. And, I think we need to see more action taken, because for us, we're very passionate about helping seniors and trying to get them to resources and the support they need. And my professional job, I'm a case manager. Our family has a home care company here in Michigan, and I can't say that we've seen elder abuse, but it fringes on almost abandonment, where, families will hire us, or, they'll tell us, about a neighbor that, has a situation, the family doesn't come and see them. And, we can't, as a home care company, do anything for a neighbor unless a family hires us to go in. And they just, they say, we're concerned, we don't know what to do. So, we recommend, contact your local adult protective services. If you have a neighbor or someone that you know of or that you hear of, and it's concerning enough, because they're the only ones that can really do something, at least open an investigation into that situation. And, it's really unfortunate that, these people, they were adults, productive members of society, and, they either have a falling out with loved ones or family, or, their spouse is gone, they live alone, their children now are too busy or live in other states, and they're left there trying to figure it out on their own, and they need support. It may not be a situation of abuse, but it might be a situation where they at least need to get, their, medications, their groceries, fresh milk. And I just think more of a spotlight and attention needs to be brought onto the issue of this for our seniors, because especially with the influx of our baby boomers, Bill, they're part of the issue is, when like my parents or grandparents were growing up, they had 7, 8, 9, 10 siblings. The baby boomers, they averaged, they say 2 to 3 children, and there's not enough of that family support to be there to help them. And I just think it's an issue that needs and warrants more advocacy and, like you said, legislation.
Yeah. We need to do a better job of getting the message out.
Yes. Yeah.
And when I say we, I mean people who
All of us.
understand the issue.
Right.
We need to get that message out there, because there are seniors out there who either have been led to believe, or they don't know that there's help available out there.
Right.
And we need to get that message out. And anytime I get to talk to a seniors group, I'll do it, a church group or a seniors group, because that message needs to be put out there. They need to hear it. And the pandemic kind of it put not a stop, but it put it slowed the process of getting that message out to seniors, and it's starting to pick up again.
Yeah.
And I tell people, especially on my Facebook page, if you want a program, please call me, because the programs for church groups and seniors groups, it's a free program. It's unless I have to travel to another state,
Right.
It's a free program.
Yeah.
And I don't travel out of state that much. But if it's in state, or if it's something that I can do this way, video, if it's for a seniors group, it's free.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, and we're going to share this interview, and we applaud all the work you're doing, Bill. And I just want to say thank you again for all of the advocacy you're doing to bring awareness to such a needed topic.
Thank you so much for having me. If I can help you later on, let me know.
We will. Absolutely. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Mr. Bill Lightfoot for joining us today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.